Good morning, YouTube. This is Nick with NK Landscaping, again as usual. Today we're going to be working on another service video. Those seem to do pretty well and you guys enjoy watching them, so we're going to be working on this machine behind me. So let's talk about the problem. So what we have here is a 2006 Kubota BX24. This is a tractor, loader, backhoe. As you can see, the loader and the backhoe have been taken off. They are quick attach. This is a factory machine that comes with a front loader and a backhoe. Very handy. My dad purchased this in 2008. We had to do some foundation drain work, and instead of hiring a contractor, I conned him into buying this and letting me run it and doing the project for him. So this is how I learned to operate. The majority of my skills came from this machine. I have put the majority of the hours on this machine. My dad really doesn't use it. That's why it's here at my house. This machine has over 3,000 hours. The hour meter is not currently functioning. It does function. It's just that the screen does not display anymore. You can see it's black there. And you can see we have replaced the screen 2 times now. But when it gets hot in the summer, that screen does start working. But this machine has over 3,000 hours on it, and in that time we have done a lot of work with it, but it has developed a problem. So we're under the machine here, facing the rear. This is a added on skid plate that I added to this machine. These are prone to having sticks jammed up in here, and there's your hydraulic filter, and then there's a cooling fan for the transmission way up there that you cannot see. But you may notice a bit of oil. I did a real good job of pressure washing everything. You can see a bunch of oil, and if I get you back here, you can see that fan. You might be able to see the leaking. Yep, right below that fan you see those fins. So basically what's going on here, I'll show you in a diagram over here. But the front of the transaxle, there's that finned area I was talking about. The drive shaft from the engine that powers the transmission comes in right about here. And I think what has happened is there's a seal on that. You can just see on this diagram, this is that front cover. There's a seal on that shaft, and I think that has gone bad, and it's causing oil to leak down into the fan that cools the transaxle, and it sprays it everywhere. This has been getting worse for the past year or so, and I've kind of been putting it off until the winter because it is a pretty big project to tackle this. You basically have to disassemble the whole rear of the machine. It's not going to be the most fun job. Now, as I mentioned before, I did pressure wash the machine just a bit earlier. I like to clean my machines before I work on them. I'm just a bit of a neat freak, and I find it's much more relaxing to work on a machine that is not super greasy, super dirty, super oily. Keeps my garage cleaner, keeps me cleaner, and it just leads to less contamination in the end. We're gonna have to do a ton of work up here. The seat, the ROPS, all this fender assembly has to come off, and that's quite a job. So we're gonna start doing that here. Well, that looks a little different. So I've been at this for a little while now. You can see I've got a majority of the rear plastics and such taken off. Now, I took a few shortcuts. You may notice I did not take the floor pan off. My plastic is so cracked up in the back here that I was really able to just bend it out of the way, and I don't mind if it cracks some more. It's already stitched together with zip ties in tons of places, so I'm not too concerned about the plastic cracking. You may be on your machine, in which case you'll have to take off the floor pan, which is a job in itself. So with the cover off here, you may have seen me struggle on film to get, this is the mower height adjustment. That's just press fit on there. It was rusted really bad, so I actually came up with this quick, this is just a puller. I cut a notch in it and welded some pieces together. It looks ugly. You see my first attempt there, having it offset like that with that bolt, it bent that, so I had to weld a bolt to the top. If you don't have something like this or can't weld, maybe like a pickle fork, you're gonna have to get creative in there. But now that we're in here, you can kind of see what's going on. So here's that fan I was talking about. I've replaced that, and the dealer has replaced that before. So this is the third fan. These are very not well protected. You can see the skid plate right there, that orange. If you don't have that skid plate, sticks come up through the bottom if you're working in the woods, and they take this fan out. This fan is the only cooling you have for the transmission here. So now the book says we have to take the transmission out. That means that the fuel tank is going to have to come off, the wheels have to come off, all of the linkages and hydraulic lines to the transmission have to come off. I don't really want to do that. So I've done a little bit more removal. As you can see, the hood and the side shroud are off. Basically, I need to take that drive shaft out no matter what ends up leaking, and to do that you need to unbolt the drive shaft from the rear of the motor, and then you actually are supposed to push the motor forward so that the drive shaft will come off of there. I've done that before to replace that fan, so it's not super hard. I will document that when I get to it, but in the meantime I wanted to show you something. So my buddy works over at the local tractor dealership, so he actually just sent me over the BX24 service manual. So it was super nice of him, and I'm kind of struggling in here to see. They basically talk about the HST front cover, and that's what we're dealing with. They go back and forth. They call it either the HST front cover or the oil cooler cover. So basically, in the service manual, they say take it off. They show what bolts need to come off, and then the next thing they talk about is the center section. So that's the piece behind the behind that. And when you go on Messick's to look at the parts diagram here, you have the oil cooler cover in the front. So that's where I think we're having a leak. And then there's just a gasket, and it looks like there's a bearing and an O-ring before that center stack. Now I don't see a seal anywhere, unfortunately, which is strange because when you go back to this diagram, number 5, which is right on that shaft, so here's your shaft, and number 5 here, 5 is coming up as oil seal. So I'm not sure why the Messick's part diagram is not showing an oil seal here. I've basically gone through every single option within the transmission here, and I'm not really seeing anything about that. There's tons of diagrams that show that front cover, but I'm not seeing the oil seal there. So I'm gonna have to dive a little deeper. I may have to go back and forth with my buddy at the dealership and see what we need to do. All right, we are back for day 2 on this project. You can see I got the machine up on some cribbage. I just had some extra 6x6 and 4x6 scraps, so I cut them up to get some height on the machine because I got to go under there to take the drive shaft out. That's always a fun process. We're going to get under there and start working on that now. Down under the machine now. Hopefully you guys can see a little bit. But here's our drive shaft. We have 3 12mm bolts that need to come out. And then of course we're either going to have to push the motor forward or come up with a solution. I think that's what I had to do last time. So let's get to loosening those and getting this out of here. Alright, so you're going to need a buddy for this part, or a motor hoist. We don't have that here at the moment. Kurt has one, it's just not in my shop. When you go to do this, there's 2 circlips. There's a circlip that holds the drive shaft in on this coupler, and one at the motor. So those need to be undone. And when you do pull the motor, there are these balls that you need to be careful of. There's 4 of them on this side, and I assume 4 of them on that side. I took off the hood mount and unbolted all 4 motor mount bolts. We picked up the engine and just brought it forward a little bit. That's all we had to do. It wasn't very hard. Now I should be able to slide everything out and actually get to... You got to do all this work to get to that. So you now see that I've removed the floor pan. I probably should have done that in the beginning. It would have made getting the rear plastics off. And I needed to do it to get the drive shaft out. So basically your drive shaft has a ton of pieces. Your drive shaft has circlips on each end that hold on... Let's put this drive shaft down. So the circlip holds on these. So this actually couples the drive shaft to the motor and or transmission by the use of balls. So balls go in these, there's 4 balls on each side, and they go in these slots. So this is the one from the front, the motor side. And that actually looks pretty good. The balls look nice. The one in the rear though, you can see how oblong those are. Like, that's really bad. So I'm going to be replacing this coupler. The balls look fine, and then I need to see, looks like this may even be damaged. So the balls ride in those grooves on this side, and then this would be the engine side. They ride in those grooves as well. So I'll compare those to see how we're looking. I'm also going to replace the dust caps because they were worn. And I think that's what happened. Dust caps went bad on both sides, and that allows a lot of dirt to get in there, especially on the rear with that oil leak. Dust and dirt got in there and created just a grit. I was basically sanding down that coupler, and ever since I put that fan back together, I've had a nasty vibration, and I think that's exactly what it was. So with that apart, you can now see, looks like there is an oil seal in there. I'm not sure how I'm going to identify that because it's not on the parts diagram, but what I'm going to have to do now, I'm not sure if that drives in from the front or the rear. I'm just going to go ahead and take that oil cooler plate off of there. It's really close clearance to this bar, which does not, the bar does not come out. That would be a transmission to the rear, sliding out to the rear job. So, oh boy. I was able to get this plate, the oil cooler plate, undone. It's just a few bolts, not too bad. Bottom bolts interfere with that mower cross arm. That stinks. And now that I look at it in here, it's probably impossible for you guys to see. There is no seal. You can see the light shining through there. I believe the gasket is the only thing that seals that oil cooler cover to this center stack. And what I think that means is there's that O-ring behind the bearing. So there's a bearing right here that the shaft rides on, and then there's an O-ring behind that bearing. The O-ring probably went, or a combination of the O-ring and this gasket right here. So I think what that unfortunately means is that this transmission has to come out. That's what I've been trying to avoid this whole time. But I don't think I'm going to be able to go any farther. I just cannot get this plate off, and that means I can't get a new gasket in there. I can't do anything, honestly. So I'm going to throw those bolts back in just loose, to continue letting this drain. But we're going to have to start doing a bunch of work. Alright, we're back with the Harbor Freight engine lift. Kurt, just so the viewers feel safe at home, you know, in our lifting capabilities here, how much did you pay for this lift?
I got it probably like 10 years ago for $99.
$99.
They had a coupon.
Oh. So we're going to be lifting the, I would have to guess, $5,000 transmission with the $100 Harbor Freight engine lift?
Yeah, well, nowadays that's comparable to the $269 one they sell there at Harbor Freight.
Okay. So yeah, I got a little tension on it. I got to go through, pull all the bolts out. I think there's only 8 holding it in, and then we should be able to shimmy it out of there. I'm gonna be careful. My cribbage is not great, but we'll get that slid out of there, and then we can actually start working on the problem. It was only a mild struggle, but we got that out. Good news, transmission's out, clearly. Bad news, 2 out of the 4 bolts on the left side snapped, which is strange. This is what would be the left side, and there's definitely dirt in here. You can see the 2 that snapped. I'm gonna have to try to weld those out. A little strange that those snapped on me versus this side. This is the parking brake side. Look at all that mud. My parking brake in the winter always freezes up. I think I found out why. That's crazy. I gotta get that cleaned out. But now I can have easy access to this front cover. All of this because these 2 bolts wouldn't come out all the way because they hit on the mower crossbar, and then you couldn't take this whole plate off anyway because the shaft and that crossbar. So I placed my Messick's order here. This is a little crazy because I'm going and adding a bunch of other things for service. So we got a ton of parts. I think there are 69 total parts in this order. Big order. Came out to $870 plus shipping. So my final bill was like just over $1,000 because I'm buying some larger body panel parts for this. Now, I do want to talk about something. So this rear fender, which is over here actually, this big rear fender is like $2,300. So we did not buy that. And then I was gonna buy an hour meter. They've now updated it to a new one, but it was $671, so I'm not gonna buy that either. But we basically bought everything we need, and I'm gonna walk you through what I think the problem was here. So, this is our oil cooler cover. Like I said, that does not have a seal in it. There's just, you can see the outline of the gasket there. And then there's an O-ring that presses up against that hole. That whole oil cooler cover presses up against this oil port, or the oil cooler cover pushes up against the oil port cover. So these are just basically brass bearings or bushings that ride on the hydraulic pumps here. So this top one is your main piston hydraulic pump for your travel speed, and I'm not sure what that lower one is. I have to read the manual. But on the other side of that, this lower one where the input shaft seal rides on, there's a seal on the back of that I think is bad. But the main issue, so this bearing sits in the front of that cover on the outside here. That was spinning in place. It looks like it built up a little bit of heat, which is definitely no good. So we ordered a new bearing. And the main culprit, I think, was this O-ring. So this O-ring sits in front of the bearing, and then the oil cooler cover squishes this in place. So my theory here is when the hydrostat fan breaks, like if you run a stick or something up into it, and keep in mind we're on our third fan, so we've broken 2 fans, you kind of overheat the gaskets, the O-rings, the bearings, and everything in there, including the seal in this oil port. And if you don't get that fan replaced quickly, you're going to overheat that stuff. Now, I think what happened was when our original fan went, we overheated a little bit, weakened everything, and we may have started the oil leak then. Then we broke the fan a second time, leading to another overheat condition, which ruined those seals even further. Now you have a problem of oil leaking in an extremely dusty environment that is up under the machine, and there's a fan blowing air through these fins. Now you have oil which causes gunk to cake up in there, further reducing your cooling. So even if you have a working fan, you now have a reduced cooling capability, and you're just cooking those gaskets more and more and more. Now, I ran this by my friend that works at the local Kubota dealer, and he said that there was a TSB out for this. Now, this machine does not fall under warranty or anything for that. Unfortunately, we just have to deal with it. Not a problem. So, I'm going to get all these parts cleaned up really well, because we're not going to put them together dirty. We want the most cooling capability possible. Quick little update for you guys. I have been working on these 2 bolts for like 5 hours now, 4 or 5 hours. I tried welding them, kept snapping the nuts and washers. I like to use the washer trick, so you know, you may have seen people weld a nut right to a stud. It always ends up snapping off unless you get a really good weld. But if you weld a washer, you're able to penetrate better into the bolt, and then you weld the nut right to the washer. So I tried that a few times. I got nowhere. I kept snapping the bolt deeper into the threaded hole here, so that wasn't working for me. As you can see, I've drilled a 1/4 inch hole in both bolts, probably about halfway of their total depth. Now, the one thing I don't have in this garage is bolt extractors. We have a ton of nut extractors, but no bolt extractors, so we're gonna have to run out and get that. Alright guys, so we're back working on the BX. I got a big shipment from Messick's. It's been a little over a week. A lot has happened. I got sick, Kirk got sick, Steph got sick. It was crazy. But anyway, I've kind of unpacked this box. I have some of my bigger stuff over to the side that I'm not going to be worrying about right now. Filters, and the bigger parts, fluids. And I have my smaller parts here kind of laid out. Alright, so we went through the tedious process of scraping all the gasket material off of the 2 covers, plus the actual transmission housing itself. I replaced the 2 gaskets, the O-ring in front of the bearing, the seal in the oil port, oil block or whatever you want to call it, and then there's 1 O-ring on the bottom. All these bolts get torqued to 14, it's actually 13.3 to 15.5 foot-pounds. I did 14 foot-pounds, which comes out to 168 inch-pounds, because that's the only, I don't have a foot-pound gauge that goes that low, so I did inch-pounds. You may notice I haven't cleaned this yet. I figured I'd clean it once it was off, or back together, just so I could get in there really well and clean that out. That should take care of the main oil leak on this machine. So we got a bunch of other things to do here, so we're going to continue down the line. The next thing we have to work on, you remember I fought these 2 holes. I was able to get the rusted stud or bolt drilled out of there, but now we have a loose, nasty hole. You see that? That's still good. The top one came out a little better. It's not as loose, but I'm going to go ahead. You can see this is tight. That's real tight. That's a factory hole. This guy still has a decent amount of wiggle. So these are 2 new bolts. What we're going to do here is we're going to put in a helicoil. These are M12 by 1.75 bolts. So 2 brand new bolts. And yeah, we're going to drill and tap for the helicoil. They want a 31/64 drill bit. And I'm going to put that in the right angle drill, because that's the only thing that gives me enough room So let's work on that. So those helicoils went in really easily. These bolts are much tighter now. Still a little wiggle, but I'm much more confident in that. All right, guys. I apologize for kind of skipping ahead on you and not filming. This tractor is coming up on like a month being in this garage now. And as you can see, there's been developments with new tools for NK Garage over there. So if you haven't checked that out, that's all covered there. I want to get this thing out of the garage and working. So as you can see, I've got the transmission back in the machine, the side plates and everything bolted on, drive shaft and four-wheel drive is connected. I'm kind of at the point now where the majority of everything is back together, and I kind of want to make sure this thing's not going to go ahead and leak on me, and then I have to take this all apart. So I really don't want to put a whole bunch more parts back on before finding out that this is going to work for me. But I need to replace the cover back here for the PTO, because like I said, we have that broken spot. We got to RTV that because that's not a gasket that you can purchase. We'll let that tack up, and then we'll be able to get some oil in this thing and start it with everything off to make sure that we're not leaking anywhere and it's not going to leak overnight or anything. So all right, so you can see on our part here, this little tab right here is broken off. Unfortunately, the new part didn't come painted, but I really don't care. I got to transfer over this breather to the new part, as well as this little ball bearing guy that's like a spring detent for the PTO cover. So that also kind of goes hand in hand with this part. So I just thought it was kind of cool. You can check this out in here. So the PTO lift, all it is just, it almost looks like a piston out of a motor. You have a little rod here, and there's the lift arm. So that moves. And it's just this big piston that only has oil come from the bottom to lift it up. It's a very simple, very cool design. But now what I have to do, I gotta get some RTV on this and the gasket plate after I get those parts swapped over, get that on there and follow the instructions for the RTV. I know a lot of people like to go heavy with the RTV. You don't have to go crazy with it, but we're gonna get that done and get that covered back up. So we got that new cover on. That wasn't too bad. I'm letting the RTV tack up for about an hour, and then we'll torque that thing down to its torque spec. In the meantime, this is something that is often overlooked on these machines. This is the hydraulic pre-screener. So this is on the left side of the tractor, down right below where the axle enters. It's just a 12mm bolt. You're gonna wanna go ahead and pull that out. Clean this really well with brake parts cleaner, and then I ended up getting a new O-ring. The old one was fine. I've done this job once before, but if you wanted it, here's the part number for that. But that just slides on right here in this groove. So we're gonna get that reinstalled, put in, and then I think we're good to add hydraulic fluid. I'm gonna check everything over, but then we can add some hydraulic fluid, and once that cover there is torqued down tight, we can run this thing. Everything is hooked up. I have a custom temporary fuel tank. I rigged up a starter button because all of the safeties are disconnected and it will not try to start with the key on. I want to crank this over a little bit with no fuel. I'm going to hold the starter fuel shut-off solenoid in the off position so that this does not start. I want to, get that transmission spinning a little bit. Hopefully the oil pump will circulate a bit of oil. So I'm going to reach over, shut down the fuel, and alright, turn the key on so the fuel pump runs. You can see the fuel coming out there. I'll run the glow plugs for a second. So everything on the key switch still works, I just can't start anything because one of the safeties is not happy. So here we go. Let's see if it starts. plates that I had balancing here were making all that noise. So, I don't see any oil pouring out yet. That's a good sign. I'm gonna keep testing here. Let that run for a minute with no more metal plates everywhere. And then we'll see if everything we did is correct. So we're running at idle right now. These BXs do not make a lot of hydraulic flow at idle, but if I pull back on the PTO raise, you can see that just very slowly going up. So we do have hydraulic pressure in the system. Like I said, I do not see anything pouring out of here yet. Let's see if I put it in low range. We have drive and forward and reverse. Put it in high range. Same deal. So yeah, I'm gonna let this run here for quite a few minutes, kind of get up the temperature a little bit and make sure we don't have any leaks. This really wasn't a big leak while it was running. It leaked more when it was sitting. So we'll let that run for a while and check in on that in a few minutes. So we've been running for, let's say, 15 minutes. I was able to get the hydraulic lines all nice and warm. I wouldn't say hot, but warm to the touch. The oil cooler block is warm to the touch. And let that sit overnight. And then check this thing really good for leaks in the morning. I'm gonna put down some new matting below it. And then that's it for today. So, alright, next day. The pig mat looks dry. That is a really good sign. So now it's just full bore, put this thing back together. I mean, it needs a still full service engine oil change and all that, but now I'm confident with the repair back here. We can get this thing all back together. Quick progress update, because you guys just died over there on battery. I'm installing the new grab rail handles. I've had to replace a few bolts. So these used to be these Phillips heads, just machine screws. They weren't in horrible shape, but we were missing 2 of them. So we swapped over to some socket head cap screws, and then these guys. So there's 1, 2, 3 of those. Basically the way these are, they use these nutserts that just get heated into the plastic here of the handles. That's why we're replacing them. The nutserts just came out because they were so corroded in place, unfortunately, so it just destroyed this handle. Otherwise, you know, these handles had nothing wrong. Well, I wouldn't say nothing wrong with them, but they could have been reused, so I guess we're getting new ones. So I dug into my Subaru hardware. We used to part out a lot of Subarus, and got a bunch of nice 14mm bolts, so I'm getting those put together. top plate cover can go back on, all the wiring has to get connected, and then we're on the home stretch here. You may notice a thing has changed. We are now spun around and the tractor did it under its own power. So that means that everything works. I drove around outside for a good 10 minutes trying to get everything up to temperature. We had great power in the transmission, the four-wheel drive, the PTO, diff lock, everything seems to work properly. Not that I think it wouldn't. We didn't really take any of that apart, but that's great. Now, not related to that transmission, I'm going to do a full service on the machine. I have an oil filter, engine oil, and I'm going to do the front axle as well, since everything in the back of the machine is done. We're going to get that done, get the hood back on, and that'll be it. I'm really happy everything's working out. ROPS is on, all the lights work, that's another thing, fuel gauge works, so we're not missing anything. So let's get it back together. New floor mat looks really nice. And the new grab handles are sturdy. So I have not seen the tractor look like this in a long time. Look at this thing. Everything's back together. I even gave it a little quick wipe down. Brought some of the faded plastic back to life. It'll only last a little bit, but like I said, this machine has north of 3,000 hours. It is a 2006. So it's coming up on 20 years old. It's already 18, and we have used this for commercial, and I mean commercial work. It's been abused, it's been used. We mowed with it commercially, we've dug with it commercially, we've moved snow with it, we pull stuff that it shouldn't be pulling, and it just keeps on giving. So everything is fixed. Every fluid except coolant has been changed in this thing. All new filters, a full service, and it is running great. It's not leaking anymore. Now I know this isn't exactly a tutorial. I'm not really a tutorial channel. I just kind of bring you along for the ride when I'm doing stuff like this. I think it's kind of cool to show working on, you know, equipment. When you own a company, you got to fix this stuff. So I think all in, we're looking at about 20 hours of time, 20 to 25 hours of time that I've put into this. It's taken 3 weeks, but as far as the time spent actually working on this machine, I'd say 20-25 hours. It's not too scary of a job if you have the service manual. It's not super detailed, unfortunately. Hopefully this video helps anybody that tries to do this in the future. You're going to set aside some time. It's not fun to pull that transmission, but it's doable. You are going to need some specialty tools though, probably some sort of hoist or engine lift, and then just the standard, you know, regular tools. You know, the repair itself didn't really take any crazy tools. It's just getting that transmission up and out of there. You're going to need some blocks and jacks and all sorts of things. So it is doable in a home garage as long as you have some sort of lift. You might be able to finagle it out with a jack. I would prefer a lift, but I want to thank you guys for watching. I'm happy this thing is back in action. We're going to be using it on some jobs here, so I was kind of like rushing to get it done. I wouldn't say rushing to get it done, but I was antsy to get it done. So I will see you all guys on the next one. If you're interested in continuing along the journey with me, like, comment, subscribe if you want. If you don't, it's fine with me too. And I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for checking in. Alright, see you guys.